The first time Eden Martinez saw Minjun Park after 20 years, she didn't recognize him. Not the expensive suit. Not the cold eyes that made grown men step back. Not the 4 bodyguards who moved like shadows. But when he rolled up his sleeve during a community meeting, she saw it. Her grandmother's silver bangle, the one she'd given him when they were children. Tarnished now, worn thin, but unmistakable. This man, this dangerous stranger who owned half of Seattle, had kept the dollar store bangle for 2 decades. He'd built an empire searching for her. And the way his dark eyes locked onto hers with recognition that stole her breath, Eden realized something terrifying. The boy she'd saved had grown into a man who looked at her like she was his only reason for breathing. Welcome to Afro K-Drama, besties. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button for more quality stories. Eden Martinez was 9 years old when she learned that kindness could be dangerous. She stood behind Lincoln Elementary in the rain, lunch tray balanced on her arm. Her stomach had been growling since morning. Breakfast was a memory. There hadn't been any. Her mama had left for her first shift at 5 a.m., and Eden had learned not to complain about empty cupboards. Dinner wouldn't happen until her mama got home around 9, maybe later if the bus ran slow, or if her manager made her stay for inventory. But hunger was something Eden knew how to ignore. She was good at it. Had been since she was 6 and her daddy left, taking the grocery money and anything else that wasn't nailed down. What she couldn't ignore was the boy on the other side of the fence. He stood in the overgrown weeds behind the chain link, rain pouring over him like the sky had forgotten he existed. Too thin, the kind of thin that spoke of weeks, not days. Clothes that hung off his frame like borrowed shadows, several sizes too big and soaked through. Dark hair plastered to his forehead. Eyes that looked past things instead of at them. Like he'd learned not to hope for anything good, because hope only made the disappointment hurt worse. Eden's best friend Kesha was talking beside her. Something about a TV show everyone was watching, but the words floated past. All Eden could see was that boy. The way he swayed slightly, like standing upright, took everything he had. The way his hands trembled even though he tried to hide them in his sleeves. The way he looked at her lunch tray with an expression that made her chest hurt. She looked down at what she had. 5 chicken nuggets, still warm. Canned peaches swimming in heavy syrup. A carton of chocolate milk she'd been saving all week like treasure, drinking only white milk at every other lunch so she could have this one thing to look forward to. Her stomach twisted with want. She was so hungry. Had been hungry for so long that it felt normal now, just part of existing. But something else twisted harder, something that felt like her grandmother's voice in her head, strong and certain. Baby, we don't have much, but we always have enough to share. That's what makes us rich. I'll be right back, Eden said, already moving. Kesha frowned, following her gaze to the fence. Girl, where you going? That's the creepy part of the. Just wait here. Eden's feet carried her toward the chain link like they had their own mind. The other kids didn't notice. They were huddled under the covered area, trying to stay dry. Teachers were inside where it was warm, visible through steamed-up windows, drinking coffee and pretending to supervise. The boy's eyes tracked her approach, wide and wary, like a stray dog deciding whether to run or stay. Up close, she could see more. The bruise on his jaw, greenish-yellow and fading, but still visible. The dirt crusted under his nails. The way he held himself perfectly still, barely breathing, like moving might shatter whatever fragile safety he'd found in this forgotten corner of the schoolyard. There was something else, too. Something in his eyes that made Eden's 9-year-old heart understand things she had no words for. A kind of emptiness that came from being invisible for too long. You hungry? Eden asked softly, her voice almost lost in the sound of rain hitting pavement. The boy stared at her. Just stared. Like he didn't trust the question. Like maybe he didn't even understand it. Eden reached through the fence, held out half her sandwich. The bread was starting to get soggy from the rain on her hands, but it was still good. White bread, peanut butter, grape jelly. Nothing special. Everything. It's okay, she said, trying to smile even though her stomach was already mourning the loss. I already ate. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, sharp and wrong. But the truth of his need was written all over his face, in the hollow of his cheeks, in the way his eyes couldn't stop tracking the food in her hand. His hand moved so slowly, trembling the whole way. When his fingers finally closed around the sandwich, Eden saw the thin white scar on his wrist, raised and deliberate, like someone had cut him on purpose. Her heart squeezed so tight it hurt. He ate like someone who'd forgotten what food tasted like he was afraid the world would snatch it back if he didn't finish fast enough. No chewing. Really. Just tearing and swallowing, barely tasting. A small sound escaped him, something between a sob and a gasp, and Eden had to look away because it made her want to cry. When she looked back, the sandwich was gone, and he was staring at his empty hands like he couldn't believe what had just happened. "What's your name?" Eden asked. The boy's eyes lifted to hers. For a long moment, she didn't think he'd answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, Min-jun. His accent was thick, the syllables unfamiliar in her mouth when she tried to repeat it. Min-jun. He nodded. "I'm Eden." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she was still standing there. That she hadn't left after giving him food, like he was a charity case to check off a list. "Do you?" Eden gestured vaguely. "Do you go to school here?" Min-jun shook his head quickly, fear flashing across his face. "Where do you go?" He looked down at his feet. Said nothing. Eden glanced back at the school building. Kesha was still waiting, watching with obvious confusion. The lunch period was half over. "I have to go back," Eden said. "But I'll come tomorrow. Same time." "Okay." Min-jun's eyes widened. "Why?" The question surprised her. "Because you're hungry. You don't know me." "So?" Eden shrugged, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "You don't have to know somebody to help them. My grandma says that's the whole point, helping people you don't know." She walked back to Kesha, leaving the boy staring after her through the fence. That night, lying in bed listening to her mama's tired footsteps in the hallway, Eden thought about those hollow eyes, about hunger that went deeper than an empty stomach, about the scar on his wrist and what it meant. She made a decision in the darkness of her room, with the sound of sirens in the distance and her own stomach still empty. Tomorrow, she'd bring more. The next day, Eden brought the other half of her sandwich. And the day after that, an apple. By the end of the first week, she'd established a routine. Every lunch period, rain or shine, she'd walk to that back fence. And every time, Min-jun would be there, waiting like he still couldn't quite believe she'd come back. She learned things about him in fragments, pieces of a story he was too scared to tell all at once. He was 12 years old. Though he looked younger, hunger and fear had a way of shrinking people. He spoke English like each word cost him something precious, his sentences broken and careful, always watching her face to see if she understood. He told her he'd come from Korea, but not the way most people came. Not on a plane with papers and family waiting. "They put us on boat," he said one gray afternoon, voice barely above a whisper. "Many of us. Children. They say we come to America for good job. For school. For better life." Eden felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Where are your parents?" Min-jun's face went blank. "Empty. Dead. 3 years now." "Who brought you here?" "Bad men." His hands clenched into fists. "They say I work for them. Pay for my passage. But they lie. They keep me in basement. Make me work in factory. No school. No food unless I finish all my work. And if I don't..." He touched the bruise on his jaw, fading now but still visible. Eden's hands went cold despite the mild weather. She was 9 years old, but she understood enough. Understood that there were people in the world who hurt children, who saw them as things to be used and thrown away. "Where are you now?" she asked. "Where do you sleep?" Min-jun looked away. "I ran. 2 weeks ago. I hear them talking about selling me to different place. Somewhere far. So I break window and run. And now, different places. Under bridge. In old buildings. Anywhere they don't look." His voice dropped even lower. "But they are looking. I see them sometimes, asking people. Showing picture. I have to keep moving." Min-jun. Eden didn't know what to say. What could a 9-year-old possibly say to make this better? Is okay, he said quickly, like he was trying to convince himself. I am alive. That is what matters. But Eden could see it wasn't okay. Could see it in the way he jumped at sudden sounds, in how his eyes constantly scanned the area behind him, in the way he never fully relaxed, even when eating. She made another decision then. She couldn't save him from the men looking for him, couldn't give him a home or make the fear go away. But she could do this one small thing. She could make sure he didn't starve. By the second week, Eden had become an expert at creative food distribution. She started eating breakfast at school, the free program for kids whose families qualified. It wasn't much, usually just a carton of milk and a granola bar, but it meant she could save more of her lunch for Minjun. She also got better at lying. When Kesha asked why she kept disappearing at lunch, Eden said she was helping Mrs. Patterson, the school librarian, shelve books. When her teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, noticed she was getting thinner and asked if everything was okay at home, Eden smiled and said she was just growing, using up all her energy. Only her grandmother noticed the truth. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Eden was helping with dishes, her stomach growling loud enough that it echoed off the kitchen tiles. Her grandmother stood beside her, washing while Eden dried, and those knowing eyes, the ones that saw everything, found her face. You been giving your lunch away, baby? Eden's hands stilled in the soapy water. Her heart pounded. No, Grandma. Don't lie to me, child. Her grandmother's voice was gentle but firm. I raised your mama. I know what a hungry child looks like. And you've been hungry for 2 weeks now. Not growing hungry. Starving hungry. Eden bit her lip, felt tears threatening. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to be weak. But something about her grandmother's gentleness made the wall crack. There's a boy, she said quietly, voice wobbling. At school, behind the fence. He's really hungry, Grandma. The kind of hungry that hurts to look at. The kind that means he hasn't eaten in days, maybe weeks. She looked up at her grandmother, tears spilling over now. I know we don't have much. I know every sandwich costs money we don't really have. But Grandma, if you could see his face, if you could see how he eats, like every bite might be his last. I can't just walk away. I can't. Her grandmother studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she set down the dish she was washing and turned to face Eden fully. Her hands, worn and wrinkled from decades of work, cupped Eden's face with infinite tenderness. You got a good heart, baby. Just like your mama. Just like me. She paused, and Eden saw tears in her grandmother's eyes too. But you can't save the whole world on an empty stomach. I'm not trying to save the world, Eden whispered. Just him. Her grandmother was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she nodded, slow and certain. All right, but from now on, you take extra. I'll pack more. We'll make it work somehow. But Grandma, we can't afford. We'll make it work, her grandmother repeated, firmer this time. The Lord's been providing for us this long. He'll keep doing it. You hear me? Eden nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. Yes, ma'am. True to her word, her grandmother found ways. She started buying the day-old bread from the discount bakery, 2 loaves for the price of 1. She made bigger batches of everything, peanut butter sandwiches, pasta salad, whatever would keep and could be divided. She packed Eden's lunch with extra and never once complained about the cost. Minjun noticed the change immediately. More food, he said the next day, staring at the 2 sandwiches, apple, and bag of chips Eden passed through the fence. Why? Because you need it, Eden said simply. But you need too. You are thin. I'm eating, Eden assured him, which was technically true. She was eating, just not as much as before. Don't worry about me. Worry about you. Minjun looked at the food, then at her, then back at the food. His hands trembled as he reached for it. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, thank you. You don't have to keep thanking me, Eden said gently. Just eat. Winter came early to Seattle that year, rolling in with ice and wind that cut through thin jackets like they weren't even there. Eden noticed Minjun getting worse. The cold was vicious to someone living outside, someone without proper shelter or warm clothes. His lips turned blue. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the food she gave him. The cough that started small grew deeper, wetter, more painful. One December morning, Eden woke up and made a decision that would change everything. She put on 2 layers, her regular hoodie and her winter coat over it. Walked to school like normal. But at lunch, when she went to the fence, she was wearing only the hoodie. Minjun saw the coat hanging on the chain link before he even approached. Knew immediately what she'd done. "No," he said, shaking his head hard as he came closer. "No, Eden. You need. I can go inside when it's cold," Eden said firmly, already shivering in just the thin hoodie. The December wind cut right through it. "You can't. Eden, no. You will be cold. You will be sick. I'll be fine." She pushed the coat further through the fence. "Take it, please." "I cannot." "Minjun." Eden's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. "Take the coat. You're coughing so hard I can hear it from here. If you get pneumonia out here, you'll die? You know that, right? You'll die." The bluntness of it made him flinch. But she needed him to understand. Needed him to know she wasn't just being nice. This was survival. His hands moved slowly toward the coat, trembling. When his fingers touched the fabric, he closed his eyes like it hurt. "Why?" he asked, voice breaking. "Why you do this? I am nobody. I am nothing. Why you care?" Eden tilted her head, genuinely confused by the question. "Because you're hungry. Because it's cold. Because nobody should have to be alone like that. But you don't know me. I know enough. You know nothing. I could be bad. I could be." "You're not bad," Eden interrupted. "You're scared. There's a difference." Minjun stared at her like she'd just rewritten every rule he thought he understood about the world. Like kindness was a language he'd forgotten existed, and hearing it again was almost painful. He put on the coat slowly, reverently. It was slightly too small for him. Eden was 9 and he was 12, but it fit well enough. Warm. Lined. The best thing she owned. "I will give back," he said. "When I find warmer place, I give back." "Keep it," Eden said. "I mean it. It's yours now." She turned to walk away before he could argue more, her whole body already shaking from the cold. Ms. Rodriguez noticed immediately when Eden came inside, lips blue and teeth chattering. "Eden Martinez, where is your coat?" I forgot it at home." "In December? Chilly. You trying to catch your death." Ms. Rodriguez made her sit by the heater for the rest of lunch, wrapped in someone's lost and found sweater. Made her promise to bring her coat tomorrow. Eden nodded and promised, knowing she wouldn't. Couldn't. That night, her mama noticed too. "Eden, where's your winter coat?" "The navy one Grandma got you." "I lost it." Eden lied, hating how easy it was getting. At school, her mama's face fell. That coat had cost money they didn't have, money her grandmother had saved for months to buy. "Baby, how do you lose a whole coat?" "I don't know. I'm sorry." Her mama sighed, the tired kind of sigh that carried the weight of too many bills and not enough paycheck. "Well, we can't afford another one right now. You'll have to layer up. Wear 2 hoodies or something." "Yes, ma'am." Eden wore 3 hoodies to school the next day and still shivered through lunch. But when she saw Minjun at the fence, warm for the first time in weeks, the coat zipped up to his chin and his hands finally steady, something in her chest settled. This was right. This mattered. Minjun wore that coat until the sleeves barely covered his wrists, until the zipper broke and the lining started to tear. And every single day, he looked at Eden through that fence like she was the only good thing in a world that had tried to destroy him. They didn't talk much. Minjun's English was broken, shaped by fear and survival, and Eden's Korean was non-existent. But they didn't need many words. Eden would sit on her side of the fence during lunch, legs crossed, and tell him about her day. About the book she was reading in the library. About her grandmother's stories. About the talent show at school, and how Kesha was going to sing, but was so nervous she kept forgetting the words. Minjun would listen, really listen, like her voice was music he'd been starving for. Sometimes he'd smile, small and careful, like he wasn't sure his face remembered how. Sometimes he'd ask questions, struggling with the words, but trying so hard. "Your grandmother," he said one day. "She is kind? Like you?" "Yeah," Eden smiled. She's the kindest person I know. She always says we're rich in the ways that matter, even when we're broke in all the other ways. Minjun thought about that. I think she is right. You are rich. How? You have love. You have family. You have. He gestured at her, at the fence, at the food she'd brought. You have heart that sees people. That is most rich thing. Eden felt her throat get tight. She was 9 years old and didn't fully understand why his words hit so hard, but they did. One afternoon in late December, Eden noticed Minjun had something in his hand. A small origami crane, folded from what looked like a candy wrapper someone had thrown away, smoothed out and carefully creased into delicate wings. He pushed it through the fence. For you. Eden took it, cradling the fragile thing in her palm. It was beautiful in a heartbreaking way. Art made from garbage, hope crafted from nothing. You made this. My mother teach me. Before. His voice went rough on the last word. I have nothing to give, but I can make this. Eden's eyes burned. She tucked the crane into her pocket, kept it there for weeks until it fell apart from being touched too many times, and even then she saved the pieces in a small box under her bed. She started bringing other things when she could. A pair of gloves she'd gotten for Christmas that were too big for her anyway. Band-aids when she noticed fresh cuts on his arms. A blanket she'd borrowed from the hall closet, thin and old, but warmer than nothing. Her grandmother noticed the missing items, but never said anything. Just quietly replaced them or worked around their absence. The other kids at school thought Eden was weird. Always saving half her food, always slipping away at lunch, always giving away things she needed. Kesha stopped asking where she went, started eating lunch with other girls who didn't disappear mysteriously every day. Eden didn't care. She had a purpose now. Someone needed her. That mattered more than fitting in. The day before Minjun disappeared started like any other. Rain fell in sheets, turning the schoolyard into a gray, miserable landscape. Eden stood at the fence at her usual time, lunch in hand, waiting. But when Minjun appeared, he was different. Frantic, wild-eyed. He kept looking over his shoulder, fingers white-knuckled around the fence wire. His breathing came fast and shallow, like he'd been running. Or like he was preparing to. Eden dropped to her knees on her side of the chain link, heart suddenly pounding. What's wrong? What happened? They found me. The words tumbled out in broken English and Korean mixed together, too fast, too panicked. Yesterday, I see them in neighborhood. They asking people, showing my picture. Old woman, she point this direction. She don't know she helping them, but she point here. Eden's chest squeezed so tight she couldn't breathe. What are you going to do? I have to go? Tonight. Before they come back. Before they find me here. Where will you go? I don't know. Far. Different city maybe. Portland. Or east. Anywhere they cannot follow. Minjun. Eden's voice cracked. She was 9 years old and didn't have solutions. Didn't have money or resources or any way to actually help. All she had was food and hope, and neither of those would save him from the men hunting him. When will you come back? Minjun looked at her, and Eden saw tears he was fighting desperately to hold back. His hands trembled where they gripped the fence. I don't know if I come back. These men. Eden, you don't understand. They don't stop. They don't forgive. If they catch me, his voice broke. If they catch me, they will hurt me very bad. Maybe kill me. Maybe worse. Then run. Eden said fiercely, her own tears spilling over now. Run fast. Run far. But don't die. Minjun, don't let them win. You have to survive. I will try. No. Eden's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. Not try? Do. You survive. You find somewhere safe. You build a life. You promise me. Minjun stared at her through the fence. This small girl who'd shared her lunch and given her coat and treated him like he was worth something when everyone else looked right through him. Slowly, his expression shifted. The fear was still there, but something else emerged underneath it. Something harder. More determined. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, I promise. I will survive. I will get strong. I will get rich so nobody can hurt me again. His voice dropped lower, more certain. And when I come back, when I am safe and strong, I will find you. I will come back for you, Eden. I promise this. Eden laughed, the sound caught between a sob and genuine amusement. She was 9 years old. He was 12. The idea of him coming back rich and safe seemed impossible, like something from a fairy tale. But the way he said it, the way he looked at her, made it feel like a vow carved into stone. She looked down at her wrist. The silver bangle her grandmother had given her for her 8th birthday, thin and already tarnished, bought from a thrift store for $3. It was the only jewelry she owned, the only pretty thing that was hers. Eden unclasped it with shaking fingers, reached through the fence and grabbed Minjun's hand, slipped the bangle over his fingers and onto his wrist. It was slightly too small, designed for a 9-year-old girl, but it fit over his thin wrist okay, right over that thin white scar. So you don't forget me, she said. So you remember that somebody cared, that somebody saw you. Minjun's fingers closed around the bangle like it was made of diamond instead of cheap metal. Tears finally spilled down his face. I won't forget. Never. I promise. You promise everything? I promise everything. He looked at her one more time, memorizing her face. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in a torn piece of newspaper. He pushed it through the fence into her hands. Open later, he said. When I am gone. Eden nodded, couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Minjun started to turn away, then stopped. Turned back. His hand reached through the fence and found hers, squeezed tight. Thank you, he whispered, for seeing me, for feeding me, for making me remember there is good in the world. I will never forget, Eden. Never. Then he was gone, running into the rain, the navy coat flying behind him. Eden stood at the fence for a long time, rain soaking through her 3 hoodies, tears mixing with rainwater on her face. When she finally walked away, her hand was closed tight around the newspaper-wrapped package. That night, alone in her room, she unwrapped it carefully. Inside was an origami crane, more intricate than any he'd made before. And tucked inside the crane's body, folded even smaller, was a piece of paper with shaky English written on it. You saved my life. Someday I save yours. Promise is promise. I come back. MJ. Eden kept that crane in a box under her bed for 20 years. The paper eventually yellowed and the folds grew soft, but she never threw it away. She had no idea if he'd made it, if he'd survived, if the men had caught him that very night. But she hoped. God, she hoped. 20 years passed like a slow-bleeding wound. Eden grew up in Rainier Valley, watched her neighborhood transform around her. The corner store where her grandmother bought day-old bread got replaced by an organic market with prices triple what locals could afford. The community center where she'd learned to swim became luxury lofts. Families who'd been there for generations got pushed out, one rent increase at a time, replaced by tech workers who complained about the noise from the Baptist church on Sundays. She watched it happen like watching someone slowly die. Watched the soul of her community get hollowed out and replaced with something shiny and soulless. So Eden became the kind of woman who fought back. She went to college on scholarships and student loans, studied social work and community organizing, learned the language of policy and permits, of zoning laws and development rights, learned how to stand in front of city council and speak for people who'd been taught their voices didn't matter. After her grandmother passed, peacefully, in her sleep, at 83, Eden used the tiny bit of money left behind to put a down payment on a building nobody wanted. An old brick warehouse in Rainier Valley that had been condemned, scheduled for demolition. She fought the city for 2 years to save it. Fought developers who wanted the land. Fought inspectors who said it couldn't be saved. She won. The Rainier Valley Youth Center opened on a Saturday in spring, 5 years ago. No politicians, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just neighbors, kids, and Eden standing in the doorway of a building she'd brought back from the dead. It wasn't much. The heating barely worked. The roof leaked when it rained hard. The paint was donated, the furniture was secondhand, and Eden paid herself a salary that barely covered rent on her tiny apartment. But it was a safe place. A place where kids could go after school when home wasn't safe or when parents were working 3 jobs. A place where someone saw them, knew their names, asked about their days. Eden poured everything into it. 60-hour weeks. Grant applications submitted at midnight. Fundraisers that barely broke even. Teaching herself carpentry to fix broken chairs. Learning plumbing when the bathroom flooded. She dated over the years. Good men, mostly. Marcus, a teacher at the local high school, who didn't understand why she couldn't just relax sometimes. David, who worked in tech and kept trying to help her apply to higher-paying jobs, like the center was a phase she'd grow out of. James, who was sweet, but ultimately wanted someone who'd prioritize him over community meetings and emergency calls from scared teenagers. None of them lasted longer than a few months. Her mother said she had impossible standards. Her best friend Kesha, still around after all these years, said she was married to her work. What Eden didn't say, what she barely admitted to herself in the quiet hours of night, was that somewhere deep down, in a place she rarely examined, she was still that 9-year-old girl waiting by a fence, still hoping that a boy she'd fed 20 years ago had survived, had found safety, had built the life he deserved. She'd take out that origami crane sometimes, yellowed and fragile now, and read the words she'd memorized decades ago. Promises promise. I come back. But 20 years was a long time. Long enough that childhood promises faded into fairy tales. Long enough that hope became something bittersweet. Eden told herself she'd moved on. That Minjun was just a memory, a lesson learned about kindness in a cruel world. She almost believed it. Meanwhile, on the other side of Seattle, Minjun Park was building an empire on the bones of broken men. He woke every morning at 5:47 in a penthouse that cost $8 million. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Elliott Bay. The Seattle skyline spread before him like a kingdom conquered. The apartment was all clean lines and expensive minimalism, furniture that cost more than cars, art that would make collectors weep. It looked like the cover of Architectural Digest. It felt like a mausoleum. No photographs on the walls. No personal touches. No evidence that someone actually lived here instead of just existed in carefully curated emptiness. Minjun's morning routine was precise, unchanging. Espresso from a machine that cost $9,000, prepared exactly the same way. A suit from the closet, always black, always tailored to perfection, 32 identical suits because choice was a waste of time. He'd learned efficiency in the hardest ways possible. Learned that hesitation got you killed, that sentiment made you weak, that the only things that mattered were power and control. The shower was exactly 98 degrees. The breakfast was measured, protein, complex carbs, calculated nutrition without joy. The phone call started at 6:15, Tay's voice crisp and professional. The Vancouver shipment cleared customs. The Belltown property closed. $8 million, clean. Good. Minjun said, and meant it, but felt nothing. $8 million. The number was abstract. He'd made his first million before he was 23, his first 50 million by 28. Money stopped meaning anything after the first 100 million except as a way to keep score. After breakfast, before the day truly started, Minjun did the one thing that remained from the boy he used to be. He walked to his office, unlocked the bottom drawer of his custom-designed desk. Inside was a wooden box, hand-carved, worth nothing except for what it contained. He opened it slowly, like approaching something holy. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a tarnished silver bangle, 20 years old, worn thin from being touched every single day. Some of the silver plating had rubbed away completely, showing the cheap metal underneath. The clasp was broken. It had broken 8 years ago, so he couldn't wear it anymore without risking losing it. But every morning, without fail, Minjun lifted that bangle and held it in his palm like it was made of starlight. This was the only thing that mattered. Not the penthouse or the suits or the $8 million. Not the shipping empire or the real estate or the legitimate business that had grown from decidedly illegitimate roots. Just this, a child's bracelet. A promise made through a chain-link fence in the rain. Where is she? Minjun hadn't meant to become this version of himself. When he'd run from that fence 20 years ago, 12 years old and terrified, he'd only wanted one thing: survival. He ran that night with nothing but Eden's coat on his back and her bangle on his wrist. Ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. He hid in Seattle for 3 more weeks, moving constantly, sleeping in different places every night. Under bridges. In abandoned buildings. Once, memorably, in a dumpster behind a restaurant, buried in garbage bags to stay warm and hidden. The men looking for him were relentless. He saw them twice more, asking questions, showing pictures. Each time, Minjun ran before they could spot him. He learned to be a ghost. Finally, 3 weeks after leaving Eden, Minjun made it onto a truck headed south, hid in the cargo area between boxes of electronics. The driver never knew he was there. He got off in Portland, starving and half-frozen, and started over. The first year was survival in its rawest form. He stole food when he had to, dug through trash when he couldn't steal, slept rough, avoided anyone who looked official, learned English from library books, and overheard conversations, practicing syllables to himself in the dark. He got caught stealing from a corner store when he was 13. The owner, an elderly Korean man named Mr. Kim, should have called the police. Instead, he asked Minjun a question in Korean. "When did you last eat?" Minjun broke down, told him everything. The boat, the trafficking, the escape, the fence, the girl who'd saved him. All of it poured out in desperate, messy Korean. Mr. Kim listened to the whole story. Then he made a decision that changed everything. "You'll work for me," he said. "Under the table. I'll pay cash, feed you, let you sleep in the storage room. In exchange, you work hard and stay out of trouble. Deal." Minjun stared at this stranger offering kindness when he deserved nothing. "Why?" "Because someone should have helped you sooner," Mr. Kim said simply. "Because my son is your age and I can't imagine him alone like this. Because it's the right thing to do. Because it's the right thing to do." Eden's words, in different form. Minjun worked for Mr. Kim for 4 years. Learned the business, inventory, customers, books. Learned how to save money, how to budget, how to build something from nothing. Mr. Kim taught him things that mattered: honor, hard work, loyalty. But he also taught him something else, probably without meaning to, that safety was an illusion. That you could work hard and be good and still lose everything. When Minjun was 16, a gang decided Mr. Kim's store would be a good place to rob. They came in with guns, demanded everything in the register. Mr. Kim complied, gave them the money, the cigarettes, whatever they wanted. They shot him anyway. Minjun found him bleeding out on the floor, held him while they waited for the ambulance. Mr. Kim survived, but barely. The medical bills destroyed him. Within a year, he had to sell the store. "I'm sorry," Mr. Kim said the day he told Minjun. "I can't afford to keep you anymore." Minjun understood, thanked him for everything, walked away with $3,000 in saved wages and a lesson burned into his soul. Kindness without power was just a way to get hurt. From Portland, Minjun made his way to Tacoma, then back to Seattle. He was 17 now, spoke nearly fluent English, had learned to move through the world without being noticed. He got a job washing dishes at a restaurant, then another job doing overnight stocking at a warehouse. He slept 4 hours a night and saved every penny that didn't go to food and rent on a closet-sized room in a boarding house. He was good with numbers, noticed patterns, saw opportunities in logistics and supply chains that other people missed. At 18, he bought his first property, a condemned building bought at auction for $15,000, everything he'd saved. He used YouTube videos to teach himself basic repairs, worked on it every moment he wasn't at his day jobs. Flipped it 6 months later for $45,000. He did it again and again. By 20, Minjun had a small but growing real estate portfolio. By 22, he'd quit both day jobs and was doing this full-time. But real estate in Seattle wasn't simple. There were players, big developers with connections, gangs that controlled certain neighborhoods, old money that didn't like new competition. Minjun learned to navigate that world. Learned that sometimes you needed to make deals with people who operated outside the law. Learned that protection cost money, but vulnerability cost more. He learned to fight, not from a dojo, but from street necessity. Got his nose broken twice, His ribs cracked once, before he figured out how to make people afraid enough that they didn't try in the first place. By 25, Minjun wasn't just a real estate investor. He was something else. Something people whispered about. The ghost, there and not there, impossible to pin down, connected to things but never directly. He provided services. Logistics for people who couldn't use legitimate channels. Protection for immigrants who couldn't go to police. Money laundering disguised as property transactions. He told himself it was temporary, just until he was established enough to go fully legitimate. But temporary had a way of becoming permanent. The organization grew. By 28, Minjun controlled significant portions of Seattle's underground economy. Not through violence, though he could be violent when necessary, but through efficiency and intelligence. He was good at it. Too good. By 30, Minjun Park appeared on no criminal databases, but everyone in power knew his name. Police couldn't touch him. His lawyers were too good. His legitimate businesses too clean. Politicians took his campaign contributions with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. He owned 33 properties. Controlled shipping routes up and down the West Coast. Had investments in tech companies, restaurants, construction firms. On paper, he was a self-made millionaire with the inspiring immigrant success story. The truth was more complicated. But through it all, through every deal made in shadows, every compromise with conscience, every night that ended with blood on his hands, even if it wasn't his own, Minjun kept two things sacred: the bangle and the promise. 5 years ago, when he turned 27 and realized he'd built enough power to be truly untouchable, Minjun made a decision. It was time to find her. The search started systematically, methodically. Minjun approached it like any other business problem. Define the goal, allocate resources, execute the plan. The goal: find Eden Martinez. Last seen at Lincoln Elementary in Seattle when she was 9 years old. He started with the school. Bought the property adjacent to it first, then the whole block. Funded a renovation project that gave him access to old records. Found her enrollment file. Eden Maria Martinez, born October 15th, Rainier Valley address from 20 years ago. The house was gone now, demolished for condos. The neighbors who might have remembered her family were mostly gone too, pushed out by gentrification. He found her mother, Yolanda Martinez, working as a night shift manager at a grocery store in Burien. Followed her for 2 weeks, careful and invisible. She led him to siblings, cousins, a whole extended family network. But no Eden. Minjun had his people interview them subtly. Fake surveys, chance conversations, anything to gather information without raising suspicion. He learned Eden had gone to college, that she'd studied social work, that she'd come back to Seattle after graduation, that she'd been close with her grandmother until the woman's death 5 years ago. But they'd lost touch with her in recent years. She was busy, they said, doing something with kids in Rainier Valley. Working too hard, not dating enough, same old Eden. It should have been easy to find her from there. But Eden had deliberately stayed small. No social media presence. No published phone number. She paid for everything in cash or checks when possible, left minimal digital footprint. She'd learned, in her own way, to be invisible. Minjun found this both frustrating and deeply familiar. He bought more properties in Rainier Valley. Funded community programs, hoping she'd show up to one. Hired investigators who asked questions at local businesses, libraries, anywhere someone might know her. Hundreds of leads. Hundreds of dead ends. For 5 years, he searched. His organization thought he was diversifying into community development. His investors thought he was getting soft, too focused on low-income properties that didn't generate maximum profit. Tay knew better. Tay had been with him for 7 years, knew more than most people. One night, after Minjun bought his 8th property in Rainier Valley, Tay finally asked, "Hyung, what are we really doing here?" "Developing," Minjun said simply. "Bullshit." Tay's voice was quiet but certain. "You don't care about these properties. You barely look at the profit statements. You're looking for something. Or someone." Minjun was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he rolled up his sleeve. Showed Tay the bangle on his wrist. He'd had the clasp repaired by a jeweler, paid $3,000 for the repair of a $5 bracelet. When I was 12, Min Jun said quietly, I was starving, trafficked, running from men who wanted to kill me, and a 9-year-old girl gave me her lunch. Then her coat. Then this. He touched the bangle. She saved my life, and I promised I'd find her again. They stared. 20 years ago. 20 years ago. Hyung, people change. Move on. She might not even remember you. She'll remember. Minjun's voice was absolutely certain. And I'm going to find her. Tae nodded slowly. All right, then let's find her. The search intensified after that. More investigators. More property purchases. More careful questions asked in the right places. And then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, the break came. Tae walked into Minjun's office without knocking, which meant everything. We found her. Minjun's hand stopped mid-reach for his coffee cup. The room went absolutely silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Always raining in Seattle, some things never changed. Where? Rainier Valley. She runs a youth center 3 blocks from the 5th property you bought there. Tae pulled up a photo on his tablet. We've probably walked past it a dozen times. He turned the screen. Minjun's entire world tilted sideways. There. Right there. 20 years older, but unmistakable. Standing in front of a rundown brick building, arms crossed over a faded sweatshirt, jaw set in determination, eyes blazing with the same quiet defiance she'd had at 9 years old. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from too many late nights and too few victories. There were shadows under her eyes, lines of stress around her mouth that she was too young to have. But she was beautiful, not in the polished, distant way of the women who appeared in his world. Charity galas, business dinners, all artificial smiles and designer dresses. Eden was beautiful like a lighthouse in a storm. Functional, necessary, burning bright against the dark. Eden Martinez, Tae continued, consulting his notes. 31 years old. Runs the Rainier Valley Youth Center, community organizing, after-school programs, food bank, job training. She's locally known for fighting displacement. Vocal opponent of development projects that push out low-income residents. He paused, and something in his tone made Minjun look up. What? She's leading the resistance against the Rainier Valley redevelopment project. Petitions, community meetings, media interviews. The residents trust her. She's the primary voice opposing the project. Minjun's mind worked quickly. What redevelopment project? Tae hesitated, and Minjun knew the answer before he spoke. Ours. Silence stretched between them like a chasm. The shell company we set up last year, Tae clarified. Park Development Group. The one buying properties for the new commercial district. The timeline has us breaking ground in 6 months. She's been fighting us for 8 months. She doesn't know it's us. The company is buried under enough layers that no one's connected it back to you. But she's fighting us. Minjun almost laughed. The sound would have been bitter if he'd let it out. Of course fate would be this cruel. He'd spent 5 years searching every corner of Seattle for her, and she'd been right there, 3 blocks from one of his properties, opposing him. Fighting against him without even knowing his name. When's the next community meeting? Tonight. 7 p.m. St. Mark's Church basement. Tae's eyes were worried. Hyung, if you walk in there, she won't recognize me. Minjun's voice was flat, certain. I was 12 years old, half dead, barely spoke English. I'm not that boy anymore. He stood, walked to the window. Rain fell in sheets outside, turning the city gray and blurred. Somewhere out there, 3 miles away, Eden was probably at her center right now, preparing to fight him, planning strategy against an enemy she couldn't identify. 20 years. 5 years of searching, and she'd been here the whole time, building exactly the kind of life he should have expected. Still fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Still standing between the powerful and the powerless with nothing but her conviction and her voice. Still Eden. Clear my schedule, Minjun said quietly. I'm going to the meeting. Hyung, this could be complicated. If she recognizes you, she won't. But if she does, then I'll handle it. Minjun turned from the window. I've waited 20 years for this, Tae. I'm not waiting anymore. Tae nodded slowly, recognizing that tone. When Min-jun made a decision, it was final. Min-jun walked to his desk, opened the drawer, took out the wooden box. Opened it. The bangle gleamed against black velvet, tarnished and worn and perfect. He lifted it carefully, slipped it over his left hand onto his wrist. It was too small, designed for a 9-year-old girl, but he'd worn it enough over the years that his wrist had learned to accommodate it. It sat there against his skin, warm and familiar, a promise kept. Tonight, he would see Eden Martinez again. 20 years. 5 years searching. 8 months of unknowingly opposing each other. Tonight, everything changed. St. Mark's Church basement smelled like old coffee, tension, and 20 years of community potlucks soaked into the walls. Folding chairs were packed shoulder to shoulder, 80 people crammed into a space meant for 40. Residents who'd lived in Rainier Valley their whole lives sat next to families barely hanging on. Elders who remembered when this neighborhood belonged to them. Young parents terrified of being priced out. This was Eden's element. This was what she'd spent years building. Community, solidarity, collective power against forces that wanted to erase them. She stood at the front near a microphone that crackled with age, wearing jeans and a faded Howard sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. No makeup, no polish. Just Eden, tired and fierce and unwilling to back down. The lawyers sat in the front row like predators at a watering hole. 3 of them, expensive suits that probably cost more than Eden made in a month, leather briefcases worn smooth from handling. They smiled like people who knew they'd already won and were just here for the formality. "We've made a very generous offer," the lead lawyer, Chandler something, Eden had already forgotten his last name, said with practiced sincerity. "Relocation assistance, fair market value for all affected properties, priority hiring for the new development. This project will bring jobs, increase property values, revitalize the entire area." "You mean condos none of us can afford?" Eden cut in, her voice carrying without shouting. She'd learned how to project in rooms like this, how to command attention without aggression. "You mean erasing everything we've built here? Our community, our history, our home. So you can replace it with luxury apartments and artisanal coffee shops that exist for people who'll never even learn our names." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd like a wave. "Miss Martinez, progress requires change." "Progress for who?" Eden's eyes flashed. "Your investors?" "Because it's not progress for Mrs. Patterson, who's lived in the same house for 60 years and will die before she can afford anything else. It's not progress for the kids at my center who'll have nowhere safe to go when you bulldoze the only home they've ever known." The lawyer opened his mouth to respond with whatever corporate talking points he'd been fed. The basement door opened. Every head turned. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Min-jun Park entered first, and the room understood immediately that someone important had arrived. 6'1", black suit that moved like water, tailored so perfectly it might have been painted on. Silk tie, shoes that cost more than the building they were standing in. But it wasn't the clothes that made everyone fall silent. It was the way he moved. The way his 4 men fanned out behind him in practice synchronization. The way his eyes swept the room once, cataloging exits, threats, power dynamics, in a single glance. The way he carried violence like cologne, subtle but unmistakable. Conversations died mid-sentence. Residents who'd been animated a moment ago shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the lawyers looked nervous, which told Eden everything she needed to know. This man was danger. This man was power. And he was here. Min-jun moved through the crowd like water finding its level, smooth and inevitable. People leaned away without consciously deciding to, giving him space like he was electricity they didn't want to touch. His eyes swept the room one more time, professionally assessing, and then they found Eden. Everything stopped. 20 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. She stood frozen at the microphone, one hand gripping the podium hard enough that her knuckles went white. Her eyes locked onto his, and Min-jun watched recognition try to surface. watched her mind work through confusion towards something she couldn't quite name. She didn't recognize him. Couldn't. The boy she'd known had been small, starving, scared. This man was none of those things. But something in her eyes flickered, some instinct that whispered important even if it couldn't explain why. Minjun couldn't breathe, couldn't think. 20 years of distance evaporated. The girl behind the fence. The sandwich passed through chain link with small, careful hands. The silver bangle tied around his wrist while rain fell and promises were made. Here she was, still fighting, still standing between the powerful and the powerless with nothing but her conviction. Still Eden. One of the lawyers stood, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Park, we weren't expecting you to attend personally. If we'd known. Minjun raised one hand, gentle as a whisper. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Instant. Complete. The kind of quiet that came from fear so ingrained people didn't even think about obeying anymore. He walked forward slowly, deliberately, until he stood 10 feet from Eden, close enough to see the pulse jumping in her throat. The way her breath had gone shallow. The intelligence in her eyes as she tried to figure out who he was and why every instinct she had was screaming that he mattered. Miss Martinez, he said quietly. His voice was different now. Deeper, shaped by years of giving orders and being obeyed without question. But underneath, still carrying traces of that scared 12-year-old boy who'd eaten sandwiches in the rain. Eden's grip tightened on the podium. Her chin lifted in defiance. Who are you? Minjun Park. He watched the name land. Watched her search her memory and come up empty. She'd known him only as Minjun. A first name, nothing more. A boy who'd never told her his full name because he'd been too scared, too broken. You're with the development company, she said. Not a question. An accusation laced with disappointment, like she'd expected better from a stranger. I own it. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. 80 people realizing simultaneously that the ghost of Seattle, the man their neighborhood had whispered about for years, the shadow power everyone knew existed but nobody could prove, was standing in their church basement. Eden's jaw set, eyes flashing with the kind of anger that had probably terrified the lawyers. It only made Minjun's chest ache with something he refused to name. Then you know exactly what I think of you, she said coldly. I do. You know I'll fight this until I have nothing left. I know. Then why are you here? The question came out sharp, challenging. To intimidate us? To make some grand gesture about how we can't win? I'm here, Minjun interrupted gently, to stop the project. Silence. Complete and total. The kind of silence that comes when reality shifts sideways and everyone's brain needs a moment to catch up. The lead lawyer shot out of his chair like he'd been electrocuted. Mr. Park, we have contracts. Investors. Timeline commitments. The board will never. Cancel them. Minjun didn't look away from Eden. Couldn't. All of it. Every contract. Every timeline. Every plan. That's millions in losses. Tens of millions. The investors will sue. I am the board. His voice stayed level. Absolute. The kind of certainty that came from owning every share, answering to nobody. And I'm telling you to cancel everything. The project is dead. The properties will be sold to a community land trust at cost. Every family displaced will be offered their homes back at the original price. You have 72 hours to make it happen. The lawyer sat down slowly, face pale, hands trembling slightly. The other two lawyers just stared. Eden's eyes went wide, shock crashing through her anger. Why would you do that? People like you don't just walk away from millions of dollars because someone asked nicely. Minjun took a breath. This was the moment. The one he'd imagined 1,000 different ways over 5 years of searching. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up with his right hand, unbuttoned his left cuff with steady fingers, rolled back the sleeve of his expensive suit inch by inch. The Patek Philippe watch caught the fluorescent light. Platinum, limited edition, worth more than most people in this room would earn in their lifetimes. It meant nothing. Beneath it, wrapped around the same wrist, tarnished silver against his skin, the bangle. 20 years old. Worn thin from being touched every single day. some of the silver plating rubbed away to cheaper metal underneath. The clasp repaired multiple times, tiny solder marks visible if you looked close. But unmistakable. Eden stopped breathing. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes going wide enough that Min-jun could see white all around the iris. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her whole body started trembling. "No," she whispered. The word barely made it past her lips. "That's not. You can't be." 20 years, Min-jun said softly, and heard his voice crack despite decades of iron control. "I kept my promise. I survived. I got strong. I got rich. And I found you." The room erupted into confused murmurs. 80 people trying to understand what they were witnessing, but Min-jun only saw her. Only saw the way tears filled her eyes, the way recognition and grief and wonder crashed together on her face. Min-jun. Her voice broke on his name like something shattering. The boy behind the fence. The one who. Yes. But you. How did you? She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't push words past the emotion flooding her throat. "You saved my life, Eden." Min-jun's voice dropped lower, rough with everything he'd kept locked away for 2 decades. "When I was starving and nobody else saw me, you saw me. You fed me. You gave me your coat. You gave me your grandmother's bangle and made me promise to survive. Made me promise I'd build something. That I wouldn't let them win." He paused, letting 20 years of gratitude and longing pour into the silence between them. "So I did. I survived. And everything I built, every dollar, every property, every single thing I accomplished, was to keep that promise. To find you. To be worthy of the girl who saw a scared kid behind a fence and decided he mattered." Eden covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking. The microphone picked up her quiet sob, amplified it through the basement so everyone could hear the moment breaking open. When she looked up, mascara-less tears streamed down her face, her eyes holding 20 years of wondering and worrying and hoping. "You became this," she whispered, gesturing at his suit, his men, the fear he'd brought into the room just by existing. "You became the ghost of Seattle. You became—" She couldn't say it. Couldn't voice what everyone knew he was. "Powerful," Min-jun finished for her. "Yes, because power meant I could search for you, could buy buildings and hire people and move through this city until I found you." His jaw tightened. "It also meant I became someone you'd hate. Someone who destroys neighborhoods like this one. Someone who hurts communities trying to survive. Someone who profits from the same kind of systems that tried to kill me." "Then why?" Eden's voice cracked. "If you knew I'd hate it, if you knew it went against everything I believe in, why become this? Why not just?" "Because the alternative was dying in an alley at 14. The words came out raw, honest in a way Min-jun hadn't been honest in years. "Because kind people like Mr. Kim get shot and lose everything. And I learned that goodness without power is just a way to get hurt. Because I promised you I'd survive, and this," he gestured at himself, at what he'd become, "was how I did it." The honesty hit Eden like a physical blow. She gripped the podium to stay upright, her whole body swaying. The moment stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. 20 years of distance and pain and separate survival trying to collapse into understanding. Then a window shattered. Glass exploded inward in a shower of glittering shards. Someone screamed, high and terrified. The first gunshot was almost quiet, a pop that didn't sound dangerous until the second and third followed rapid fire. Min-jun moved before conscious thought could catch up, training and instinct older than logic. He crossed the space in 2 strides, wrapped himself around Eden, took her down behind the podium as chaos erupted. Pop, pop, pop. His men returned fire immediately, smooth and professional. Residents dove under chairs, scrambling for cover, screaming. More glass breaking. Shouting in Korean. Tae's voice commanding, controlled. More gunfire outside, the distinctive crack of a rifle. Min-jun kept Eden pinned beneath him, his body a shield, one hand cradling her head against his chest protectively, the other braced on the floor. He could feel her shaking, could feel her heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. She was terrified, Because of him. Because violence followed him like a shadow, and he'd brought it here, to her community, to her people. Stay down, he said into her hair, voice rough. Don't move. I have you. I've got you. The shooting stopped as quickly as it started. Tires screeching outside. Someone shouting in pain. One of his men, Minjun's mind cataloged automatically, not critical. Sirens approaching in the distance. Seattle PD responding fast. Minjun didn't move. After 20 years of searching, he'd finally found her. And someone had just tried to hurt her because of him. Because she mattered to him. And in his world, that made her a target. Get off. Eden pushed at his chest weakly. I can't breathe. Get off me. Are you hurt? He pulled back just enough to look at her, hands running over her arms, checking for blood with practiced efficiency. Did anything hit you? Eden, talk to me. Are you hurt? I'm fine. She shoved harder, getting her arms between them. Get off. Now. He did, helping her sit up carefully. Around them, residents were slowly emerging from under chairs like survivors of a bombing. His men had secured the perimeter. Tay at the door, 2 others at the broken windows, the 4th doing a sweep of the room. Eden stared at the shattered windows, the bullet holes stitched across the wall behind where she'd been standing. 6 holes. 6 bullets that would have hit her if Minjun hadn't moved when he did. Understanding dawned slowly on her face, followed by horror, so complete, it was almost beautiful in its purity. You brought this here, she whispered, voice shaking. To my community. My safe space. Because of you, because of who you are and what you do, someone just shot up a church basement full of people who've never hurt anyone. Eden. How many more? Her voice rose, cracking. How many more times will violence follow you? How many more people will get hurt just because you exist in their space? Because you. She gestured at him, at his men, at everything he represented. Because you're you? Minjun's jaw tightened. Every word landed like a blade between his ribs, sharp and accurate. I can protect you. I have the resources to. I don't want protection. She stood on shaking legs, and Minjun stood with her automatically. I want safety. Real safety. The kind that doesn't require bodyguards and bulletproof cars and men with guns. The kind where children don't have to duck under desks because someone's sending you a message. Then let me handle this. Let me find whoever. No. Eden wrapped her arms around herself, and Minjun recognized the gesture. She was holding herself together by force of will alone. 20 years I wondered about you. Hoped you were okay. Prayed you'd found a good life somewhere. That you were happy and safe and free. Tears streamed down her face, catching the fluorescent light. And you did survive. You made it. You built an empire. But you became exactly the kind of person I spend my life fighting against. Exactly the kind of power that crushes people like the ones in this room. Like the kid you used to be. The words hit Minjun harder than any bullet ever could. I became this for you, he said quietly, and heard how pathetic it sounded even as he said it. No. Eden shook her head hard. You became this to survive. I understand that. God. Minjun, I understand that better than you think. But don't put that on me. Don't make me responsible for choices you made. For people you hurt. For the violence you brought to my doorstep. She stepped back, putting distance between them, and it felt like miles opening up. I looked for you for 5 years, Minjun said. Bought properties. Hired investigators. Spent millions trying to find you. Everything I did was to keep my promise. Then you should have stopped looking. The words came out hard, final. Because the girl you were looking for, she would have wanted you to be better than this. To build something good, not just something powerful. Minjun stood very still. Glass crunched under his expensive shoes. Blood, not his, was spattered on the wall. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air. His men waited for orders, and somewhere outside the man who tried to kill Eden was getting away. He looked at Eden one more time, memorizing her face the way he had behind that fence 20 years ago. Tears on her cheeks. Defiance in her eyes. Fear and disappointment and grief all tangled together. She stood there looking at him like he was a stranger. Like the boy she'd fed sandwiches to had died somewhere in the last 20 years, and this man wearing his face was just a ghost pretending to be him. Maybe she was right. I'm sorry, Minjun said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in years. For all of it. For becoming this. For bringing danger to your door. For not being what you deserved. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, his men falling in formation around him. Behind him, Eden stood in the wreckage and tried to stop shaking. Behind him, sirens wailed and 80 witnesses tried to process what they'd just seen. Behind him, 20 years of promises turned to ash. The ghost had found his girl, and broken her heart in the process. Eden woke in an unfamiliar bed and knew immediately something was wrong. The mattress was too soft. The sheets were too smooth, silk, probably, the kind that cost more per yard than her monthly grocery budget. The room was too quiet, that particular silence that came from high floors and expensive soundproofing. This wasn't her apartment. For 3 seconds, she thought she was dreaming. Then memory crashed back like a wave. The shooting, the chaos, police swarming the church basement, statements given while her hands still shook. And then, Minjun's men, surrounding her before she could protest. Tay's voice, polite but absolutely firm. Miss Martinez, you're not safe at your apartment. We have reason to believe they know where you live. A car with tinted windows. Eden too shocked, too exhausted to fight. An elevator that went up and up and up. Minjun's voice, low and absolute. You're not safe there anymore. She'd meant to argue, meant to refuse. But then she'd seen the photos Tay showed her, surveillance shots of her apartment building, her center, even her mother's house across town. Men watching, waiting. The last thing she remembered was sitting on Minjun's couch while he made a phone call in Korean, his voice sharp and commanding. Then nothing. She must have fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion. Eden sat up fast, adrenaline spiking. The room was massive, all floor-to-ceiling windows showing the Seattle skyline at dawn. Everything was coordinated in shades of gray and white. Expensive furniture, abstract art, the kind of carefully curated emptiness that screamed money. A penthouse. Minjun's penthouse. Her phone was on the nightstand, fully charged. Someone had plugged it in while she slept, which meant someone had been in here while she was unconscious. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she just felt tired. Eden got up, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Jeans and the Howard sweatshirt, now wrinkled and smelling faintly of gunpowder. She opened the bedroom door carefully. The penthouse stretched before her like something from a magazine spread. Marble floors, minimalist furniture, art that probably cost more than her center's annual budget hanging on walls that had never known family photos or personal mementos. It was beautiful. It was soulless. It looked like nobody actually lived here. Minjun stood at the windows, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Korean. He wore black slacks and a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The bangle was visible on his wrist, incongruous against the expensive watch, a piece of her childhood wrapped around the wrist of a man who'd become a stranger. He turned when he heard her, ended the call immediately without saying goodbye. "You're awake," he said, and his voice was carefully neutral. Controlled. "You kidnapped me. I protected you." Without asking. Eden's voice shook, but not with fear. With anger. "You didn't ask if I wanted protection. You didn't ask if I wanted to come here. You just decided, the way you decide everything, and expected everyone to fall in line. 3 bullets hit the wall where you were standing last night." His voice stayed calm, infuriatingly calm. "If I'd waited for permission, if I'd stood there and debated your autonomy while men with guns were outside, you'd be dead. So forgive me for prioritizing your life over your feelings." The words landed like slaps. Eden wrapped her arms around herself. "So what now? I'm your prisoner. You're my guest. I didn't agree to be either." Minjun crossed the room slowly, stopping 6 feet away. Close enough to talk. Far enough to let her breathe. She noticed he was careful about that. Always calculating distance. Always aware of how much space she needed. "The people who attacked last night weren't random," he said quietly. "They were rivals. Sending a message. And now that they know you matter to me, that you're—" He paused, jaw tightening. "That you're important, they'll come for you again. To hurt me. To prove they can. Then stay away from me." "No." The word was simple. Absolute. It landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. You don't get to decide that, Eden said, but her voice wavered. I already have. Something in his tone made her chest tight. Not threatening. Worse. Final. Like he'd calculated every variable, and this was the only possible outcome. Your safety is non-negotiable. I have a life, Minjun. A job. A community center full of kids who need me. I can't just disappear because you decided it's safer. The center is being guarded. 24/7. My men. He pulled out his phone, showed her a photo. 2 men in dark suits standing outside her center, professional and alert. No one gets in without being cleared. The kids are safe. Your staff has been told you're dealing with a family emergency and will be back soon. Eden stared at the photo, at the evidence of how thoroughly he'd taken over her life in the span of 12 hours. I didn't ask for this. You never ask, Minjun interrupted quietly. You just give. Sandwiches. Coats. Bangles. You give until you have nothing left and never ask for anything back. You fight for everyone else and never think about protecting yourself. His eyes found hers, dark and intense. So I'm doing it for you, whether you want it or not. Eden's breath caught. This isn't protection. This is control. Something flickered in Minjun's eyes. Pain, maybe. Or recognition. Perhaps, he admitted, and the honesty surprised her. I don't know the difference anymore. All I know is that you're alive, you're safe, and I'm going to keep it that way. Even if I hate you for it. Minjun's jaw tightened. Even then, the admission hung between them, raw and complicated. I need air, Eden said, suddenly claustrophobic despite the massive space. I need to think. The balcony is through there. He gestured to glass doors she hadn't noticed. You're not a prisoner, Eden. You can leave whenever you want. Walk right out that door. But, he paused, and something in his expression made her chest ache. I can't promise you'll be safe if you do. And I don't know if I could survive watching you die because I let you go. The vulnerability in that confession caught her off guard. Eden walked to the balcony on shaking legs, needing the space, the cold air, anything to clear her head. The view was stunning. All of Seattle spread below, rain-washed and gray in the early morning light. She could see her neighborhood from here, Rainier Valley, small and defiant against the encroaching development. Could almost see the center if she knew exactly where to look. Behind her, through the glass, Minjun stood exactly where she'd left him. Not following, not crowding, just watching her like she might disappear if he looked away. Eden closed her eyes and tried to figure out what she was supposed to do with a man who'd loved her for 20 years from a distance. A man who'd become a monster to keep a promise to a 9-year-old girl. 3 days passed in strange suspension. Eden tried to leave twice. Both times, men in black suits, polite, professional, apologetic, showed her evidence. Photos of her apartment building being watched. Her center, even her mother's house. License plates traced back to shell companies. Known associates of Minjun's rivals. We're not keeping you here, Miss Martinez, Tay explained on the second day, his English perfect and his manner calm. We're keeping them out there away from you. There's a difference. Is there? Eden asked bitterly. Tay's expression softened. He's trying. In his way. It's not a good way, I know. But it's the only way he knows. On the 4th day, Eden stopped fighting it. Not because she accepted it, but because she was exhausted, and because a small, traitorous part of her felt safer here than she had in years. No worrying about break-ins. No watching over her shoulder. No fear that one of her kids would bring gang violence to the center. Just silence and expensive furniture and Minjun, who was gone most mornings but came back every evening like clockwork. He never pushed. Never demanded conversation or gratitude or acknowledgement. Just brought dinner from restaurants she'd never been to, Thai food, Italian, once an entire Ethiopian feast that must have cost hundreds of dollars. He'd set the table like they were normal people having a normal meal. Sat across from her and ate in silence unless she spoke first. It should have been suffocating. Instead, it felt careful, like he was terrified of scaring her away, of pushing too hard and losing her again. Like he was trying to be good even though he'd forgotten how. On the fifth night, over Vietnamese food that Eden barely touched, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her chest. Why did you really stop the development? Minjun set down his chopsticks with deliberate care. Because it would have hurt you. Just like that? You threw away millions of dollars because it would have hurt my feelings. Money is easy. His dark eyes met hers, and Eden saw something raw there. Something vulnerable. You're not. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. That's not a good enough reason to tank an entire project. It's the only reason that matters. Eden studied him across the table. The expensive suit he wore like armor. The controlled stillness that came from years of violence. The way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world of shadows. Who are you? She whispered. Really? Not the ghost. Not the boy I knew. Who are you right now, sitting across from me? Minjun was quiet for a long moment. Then something in him seemed to crack, like a dam finally giving way. The boy died the night I ran, he said quietly, voice raw. What survived learned that kindness gets you killed. That trust is a weapon people use against you. That the only safety in this world is power, and the only power that matters is the kind people fear. He paused, fingers tracing the rim of his water glass absently. I hurt people, Eden. Not always physically, but I hurt them. I take things they love and use them as leverage. I make them afraid because fear keeps me safe. I've done things that would make you sick if you knew the details. And you don't feel bad about it? The question came out softer than she intended. I used to. His voice went even quieter. Then I learned to stop feeling much of anything. Easier that way. Safer. Except about me. Minjun's eyes lifted to hers, and Eden saw 20 years of longing there. 20 years of holding onto a memory like a lifeline. Except about you. The admission hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its intensity. That's not healthy, Eden said, but her voice wavered. You can't build your whole life around a 9-year-old's kindness. And yet I did. He leaned back, and something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. Bitter, self-aware. I know it's not normal. I know it's obsessive and unhealthy and probably a dozen other things a therapist would have words for. But it's the truth. What do you want from me, Minjun? Really? I don't know. The confession cost him. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes. I spent 20 years imagining finding you, playing out scenarios in my head. What I'd say, how you'd react, what it would feel like to see you again. He paused, jaw working. I never thought past that moment. Never imagined what would come after. And now you're here, and I'm terrified. Of what? Everything. The word came out rough. Terrified you'll leave. Terrified you'll stay. Terrified that the only thing I've wanted for 2 decades will realize I'm not worth wanting back. That the boy you saved grew into someone you can't love. Eden's throat tightened. She stood from the table abruptly, needing distance, walked to the windows overlooking the city. She felt him follow, heard his footsteps stop a few feet behind her. Always calculating distance. Always giving her space, even when she could feel how badly he wanted to close it. I'm not that girl anymore, she said to their reflections in the glass. The one who gave you sandwiches. I grew up. Got harder. Learned that the world doesn't reward kindness. It exploits it. That fighting for what's right usually means losing. I know. But I still try anyway. She turned to face him. Still fight for communities that don't stand a chance. Still pour everything into kids who'll probably end up statistics. Still believe that kindness matters even when everything proves otherwise. Eden took a breath. You became powerful. I became stubborn. Maybe we're both just trying to survive in our own ways. Maybe we're both broken in ways that make sense when you know our stories. Minjun stepped closer, slowly, giving her time to move away. When she didn't, he stopped close enough that she could feel his warmth. Does that mean you understand? His voice was barely above a whisper. It means I'm trying to. He raised his hand slowly, telegraphing the movement. When she didn't flinch, his fingers brushed her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man who'd built an empire on fear. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. How to be near you without wanting to keep you. How to protect you without controlling you. How to love someone when I barely remember what love is supposed to feel like. Eden's heart stopped. Love. His thumb traced her jawline, and his touch was reverent, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. What else would you call spending 20 years searching for someone? Building an empire just to be worthy of them? Keeping a piece of cheap jewelry like it's the only holy thing in a godless world? Tears burned Eden's eyes. That's not love. That's obsession. Maybe. His voice was steady, certain. Or maybe for me, they're the same thing. Maybe I don't know how to love someone halfway. Maybe the boy who learned to survive on scraps never learned moderation. Eden should step back, should put distance between them, should remember all the reasons this was impossible, the violence that followed him, the empire built on fear, the fundamental incompatibility of their worlds. Instead, she leaned into his palm. I can't be your whole world, she whispered. That's too much pressure, too much responsibility. You already are. His other hand found her waist, gentle and sure. I'm sorry. I wish I could be different. Be better. Be the kind of man you deserve instead of the one I became. Then be different, Eden said, and felt something shift in her chest. A decision forming. If you really love me, if this isn't just obsession, then prove it. Change. Not for me, for yourself. Become someone you can be proud of. Minjun's eyes searched hers. I don't know if I can. Then we have nothing. The words came out harder than she intended, but she needed him to understand. I won't love a ghost. I won't build a life with someone who profits from fear. I won't bring children into a world where violence is always one phone call away. Children. The word came out strangled. Eden realized what she'd said. Felt heat flood her face. Hypothetically. I mean, if we... She stopped, took a breath. The point is, I need you to be better. Not perfect. Not some saint. Just better than you are right now. And if I try? Minjun's voice was raw with hope and fear tangled together. If I try to leave this life, to go legitimate, to build something you wouldn't hate, would you stay? Would you give us a chance? Eden looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the boy behind the man's eyes. The scared 12-year-old who'd eaten sandwiches in the rain. The survivor who'd built armor so thick he'd forgotten what vulnerability felt like. And she saw something else, potential. The possibility that people could change. That kindness could be learned, even after decades of its opposite. I don't know, she said honestly. But I'm willing to find out. The words hung between them like a lifeline thrown across an abyss. Then she was tilting her face up, and he was leaning down, and when their lips met it felt like coming home and falling off a cliff at the same time. The kiss was gentle at first. Testing, careful, like they were both afraid the other might disappear. Then Minjun's hand slid into her hair, and Eden's fingers gripped his shirt, and gentle became desperate. 20 years of distance. 5 years of searching. 6 days of tension. All of it collapsed into this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eden's mind was screaming warnings. This is wrong. He's dangerous. You can't trust this. But her heart whispered something different entirely. Something about second chances and broken people finding each other and love that looked wrong from the outside, but felt right in the spaces between heartbeats. I can't, she said, even as her hands refused to let go of his shirt. We can't. This is crazy. I've spent 20 years doing impossible things, Eden. Minjun's voice was rough, honest. All of them to get back to you. What's one more? It's not that simple. Nothing about this is simple. He moved closer, and Eden let herself be gathered against his chest. But it's real. Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me the last 6 days haven't changed something. She couldn't, because she did feel it. Had felt it since that moment in the church basement when he'd rolled up his sleeve and she'd seen the bangle. Her bangle, still on his wrist after 20 years. You scare me, she whispered into his chest. I know. Not because of what you are. Because of how you make me feel. Like I could love you. Like I could fall so hard there'd be no coming back. Minjun's arms tightened around her. I'm scared too. Of what? Losing you again. Being close enough to touch you and still not being enough. Changing everything about myself and still not being what you need. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in Eden's chest. She pulled back enough to look at him, saw tears he was fighting to hold back. Then we're both scared, she said. Both broken. Both trying to figure out if broken things can fit together. Can they? I don't know. Eden reached up, touched his face, felt the sharp line of his jaw under her palm. But I want to find out. Minjun's eyes closed like she'd given him absolution. When they opened again, they were wet. I'll do it, he said. I'll leave. All of it. The organization, the shadow business, everything you hate. I'll go completely legitimate. It won't be easy, it won't be fast, but I'll do it. Minjun. I mean it. His voice was absolute, certain. You said if I really love you, I'd change. So I'm changing. For you. For us. For the possibility of a future that isn't built on fear. Eden's breath caught. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that people could change this much, this drastically. But she'd seen too many men make promises they couldn't keep. Prove it, she said. Don't tell me. Show me. I will. Minjun pulled her close again, and Eden let herself have this. Let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe broken things could be mended. I promise. 2 weeks after the shooting, Eden's period was late. She stood in Minjun's bathroom at 3 in the morning, staring at a pregnancy test Tay had quietly purchased without asking questions, hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Positive. The words swam in front of her eyes. Eden sat on the floor, expensive marble cold against her legs, test clutched to her chest, trying to remember how to breathe. A baby. With Minjun. With a man who'd spent 5 years obsessively searching for her. Who'd kept a Bangle for 20 years. Who ran an organization that traded in fear but promised to leave it all behind. A baby who would be born into this mess of complicated love and impossible promises, and 2 broken people trying to become whole. The bathroom door opened quietly. Minjun stood there in sleep pants and nothing else, hair messy, eyes alert despite the hour. He must have felt her leave the bed. What's wrong? He crossed to her in 2 strides, dropped to his knees beside her. Are you hurt? Did something? His eyes found the test on the counter. Everything stopped. Eden watched him process it. Watched shock flash across his face. Then wonder. Then fear. Then something that looked like joy but sharper, more desperate. Eden, he whispered, voice cracking. Breaking. Are you? Yes. His hands moved to her stomach, gentle and shaking. Reverent. Like he was touching something holy. We're going to have a baby. He said it like he was testing the words. Like he couldn't quite believe them. I know. A baby. The words seemed to mean everything. His eyes found hers, wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. Our baby. Eden grabbed his face, made him look at her, made sure he understood what she was about to say. I need you to promise me something. Anything. Go legitimate. All the way. No more organization. No more shadow business. No more being the ghost. Her voice shook but stayed firm. Our child will not grow up in that world. Will not learn that power comes from fear. Will not watch their father become a monster. Tears streamed down her face. If you want us, if you want this family, you leave that life behind. Completely. No halfway. No, just one more deal. You walk away and you don't look back. Silence stretched between them. Minjun's hands stayed on her stomach, feeling the place where their child was growing. A life they'd created. A future they hadn't planned, but suddenly couldn't imagine living without. Okay, he finally whispered. Okay. You promise? Really promise, not just words. I promise. He pulled her against his chest, held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. I'll find a way. I'll make it work. I'll burn it all down if I have to. For you. For our baby. For the family I never thought I'd have. Eden buried her face in his neck and let herself believe him. Let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, love was enough to change someone. The next 6 months were surgical and brutal. Minjun spent every waking hour dismantling an empire he'd spent 15 years building. They thought he'd lost his mind. Others in the organization saw weakness, opportunity, a chance to take what he was leaving behind. But Minjun didn't care. He started with the shadow businesses, the shipping routes that moved things better left unexamined, the protection rackets disguised as security services, the money laundering hidden in legitimate transactions. He ended contracts with a ruthlessness that would have impressed his enemies. Paid people off, made deals. In a few cases, made threats, not violence, but legal exposure, evidence that would destroy them if they didn't cooperate. He learned to weaponize legitimacy the same way he'd once weaponized fear. The properties came next. Everything he owned that had been acquired through questionable means got sold or transferred. The Rainier Valley properties went to a community land trust at cost, just like he'd promised. Families got their homes back. The development project was officially dead. Eden's Center received an anonymous donation, $500,000, enough to replace the roof, upgrade the heating, hire 2 full-time staff members. She knew where it came from, but didn't comment. Some battles weren't worth fighting. The organization itself took longer to dismantle. There were people who depended on him, immigrants who needed protection the law wouldn't provide, businesses that operated in gray areas out of necessity, not greed. Minjun found legitimate solutions where he could. Legal aid, proper business licenses, connections to real resources instead of shadow networks. Some people walked away easy, grateful for the help they'd received and ready to move on. Others required convincing, money, mostly, enough to start over somewhere else. A few required threats. Minjun made them clearly, coldly, one last time. Leave. Start over. Or everything you've ever done becomes public record. It worked. Fear, one final time, serving a purpose. The violence receded slowly. There were challenges. Rivals who saw opportunity, people who felt betrayed, a few who tried to take what he was leaving behind. Minjun handled it all with surgical precision, using lawyers instead of muscle, evidence instead of intimidation, turning the tools of legitimacy against people who'd only ever understood force. Eden watched him change, saw the ghost fade, saw something else emerge underneath. Something softer, more human, a man learning to build instead of destroy. He came home exhausted most nights, collapsing onto the couch beside her. But he always stopped first to touch her growing belly, always asked how she felt, always looked at her like she'd given him a reason to want to be better. This is harder than building the empire, he admitted one night in her 5th month, his head in her lap, her fingers in his hair. Good things usually are, Eden said softly. Is it worth it? She looked down at him. This man who was dismantling his entire life for her, for their baby, for the possibility of a future that didn't taste like ash. Ask me in 20 years. Minjun smiled, real and genuine, and Eden's heart did that complicated thing it always did around him now. Fear and love and hope all tangled together. Tay stayed until the end, helped with the transition, made sure Minjun didn't leave loose ends that would come back to hurt him. On his last day, he stood in what used to be Minjun's office, now stripped bare, ready to be converted into something legitimate. You're really doing this, he said. Not a question, an observation. Yes. For her. For them. Tay gestured at the ultrasound photo on the desk. 26 weeks. Already loved more than anything Minjun had ever owned. Yes. Tay nodded slowly, something like respect in his eyes. Then I hope it's worth it, Hyung. It already is. After Tay left, Minjun sat alone in the silence. The office felt different now. Lighter. Like shedding skin that no longer fit. His phone buzzed. Eden. Center's ready for the reopening. You coming? He smiled. Typed back. Wouldn't miss it. The Rainier Valley Youth Center reopened on a Saturday in September. No politicians. No cameras. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just neighbors, kids, families, people who'd lived there long enough to remember when hope felt possible. Eden stood at the entrance, 8 months pregnant, glowing in a deep purple dress with gold threading that Minjun had commissioned from a local designer. Beautiful and comfortable and completely her. Minjun arrived alone. No guards. No entourage. Just him in a dark suit with the bangle visible beneath his watch. A piece of her childhood he'd never let go. When Eden saw him, Her whole face lit up like sunrise. "You made it," she said, and her smile was everything. "I told you I would." She took his hand, their fingers fitting together like they'd been designed for it, and led him inside. The center was transformed. New paint and colors the kids had chosen. New equipment. Art on the walls made by the children, their names signed proud in the corners. A commercial kitchen for cooking classes. A library with comfortable chairs and thousands of books. A computer lab. A music room. Everything a community needed to thrive. In the main room, 70 people gathered. Some who'd been at that community meeting 6 months ago, when Min-jun had walked in as the enemy. Some who'd watched with suspicion. Some who were starting to believe. Mrs. Patterson approached, the elderly woman who'd lived in Rainier Valley for 60 years, who'd almost lost her home, who'd fought beside Eden. "Mr. Park," she said carefully. Min-jun braced himself, unsure what to expect. "Thank you," she continued, and her eyes were wet. "For choosing to be different. For proving people can change. For giving us back our neighborhood." Something in Min-jun's chest cracked wide open. "I'm trying," he said quietly. "Still learning how." "We can see that." She patted his arm with infinite gentleness. "Keep trying. That's all anyone can ask." Others came forward then, thanking him, welcoming him, treating him like a member of the community instead of a threat. It felt better than power ever had. That night, back at the penthouse, which felt less like a mausoleum now, with Eden's things scattered around, with life and warmth seeping into corners that had been cold for years, Min-jun watched Eden move around their home. "Our home," he corrected himself quietly, still getting used to the idea. She was making tea, humming something under her breath, one hand unconsciously cradling her belly. Their daughter, they'd found out 2 weeks ago, a girl, already so loved, kicked visibly, and Eden laughed. Min-jun felt something he couldn't name. Something bigger than happiness, deeper than contentment. Something like peace settling into bones that had only ever known survival. "What are you thinking?" Eden asked, catching him staring. "That I spent 20 years building the wrong thing," he said honestly. "That I should have been building this all along." She crossed him, let him pull her down beside him on the couch, his hand finding her belly automatically. "You built what you needed to survive," she said gently. "Now you're building what you need to live. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." She kissed him, soft and sure. "And you're doing it. Every day? Choosing us over everything you used to be." "It's not a choice," Min-jun said. "It's the only thing that makes sense." Their daughter kicked against his palm, strong and insistent, and both of them laughed. They married at City Hall in March, 2 weeks before Eden's due date. Small ceremony. Just family and close friends. Eden's mother cried through the whole thing. Kesha served as maid of honor, still not entirely sure how her childhood best friend had ended up here, but supporting her anyway. Tay came, brought a gift for the baby, stayed for cake. The bangle was woven into Eden's bouquet alongside fresh flowers. Tarnished silver and white roses. 20 years old and still holding. Min-jun stood waiting, watching Eden walk toward him in a simple white dress, and remembered being 12. Starving. Invisible. Watching a girl share her lunch like it didn't cost her everything. She'd saved him twice. Once with a sandwich. Once with a choice. When they exchanged vows, Min-jun's voice stayed steady until the end. "I survived hell to come back to you," he said. "And you taught me what to build instead." Eden's hands tightened around his. Tears on her cheeks catching the light. "You kept your promise. Always." The kiss tasted like salt and relief, and 20 years of waiting finally ending. Their daughter was born in May, on a Tuesday morning when the rain finally stopped and sun broke through Seattle's clouds. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect. Loud. With dark hair and eyes that would probably change, but for now looked like her father's. They named her Maya. Min-jun held her in the hospital room. This tiny human who'd rewritten his entire existence, and felt something he'd forgotten could exist. Complete peace. Eden watched from the bed, exhausted and happy and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. "You're crying," she said softly. "I know. The ghost of Seattle is crying over a baby. The ghost is dead." Min-jun looked up, eyes wet, smile genuine. This is just me. Minjun, husband, father, community member, legal business owner. All the boring, normal things I never thought I'd be. You're not boring, Eden said. You're just finally yourself. Maya made a small noise, and Minjun looked down at her like she was the only important thing in the universe. Maybe she was. 3 years later, Eden found Minjun at the youth center after hours. He stood by the chain-link fence they'd installed in the back garden. Not rusted and forgotten like the original, but clean, decorative, maintained. A memorial to where it all started. A boy stood on the other side, maybe 8 years old, too thin, clothes that didn't fit right, watching the center through the fence like he was trying to decide if it was safe. Eden's heart clenched, recognition flooding her. She started forward, but Minjun caught her hand gently, shook his head. They watched together as Maya, 3.5 now, fearless and kind like her mother, stubborn like her father, approached the fence with half a sandwich. "You hungry?" she asked in her small, clear voice. The boy stared, suspicious and hopeful in equal measure. Maya pushed the sandwich through the chain link. "It's okay. I already ate." She hadn't. Eden had watched her save it from lunch specifically for this. The boy took it with shaking hands. Ate like the world might change its mind. Like every bite might be his last. When he finished, Maya pulled the bangle off her wrist, the one Minjun had given her on her 3rd birthday, thin silver just like the original, sized for a child, and handed it through the fence. "So you remember someone cares," she said seriously. "So you know you're not alone." Then she ran back inside to continue playing. The boy stood there holding the bangle like it was made of starlight, looked at the center, then disappeared into the Seattle afternoon. Minjun's throat went tight. Eden leaned against him, both of them watching the space where the boy had been. "History repeating," she whispered. "History evolving," Minjun corrected. He kissed the top of her head, and his voice was thick with emotion. "She learned from the best." "Both of us," Eden said. "She learned from both of us. Your survival, my kindness, his fear and her hope. Think he'll come back? If Maya keeps feeding him?" Eden smiled. "Absolutely. That's how it works. One sandwich, one coat, one bangle, one choice to see someone when the world's trying to make them invisible. Good." Minjun wrapped his arms around his wife. "Then we did something right. We did everything right." Above them, the Seattle sky turned purple and gold. Inside the center, children laughed and played. Maya ran back outside, already scanning for her new friend, already planning what to bring tomorrow. The bangle changed hands. The cycle continued. Somewhere in the city, another story was beginning. Another hungry child. Another act of kindness. Another promise being planted that would bloom decades later. And the man who used to be the ghost stood with his wife and daughter, watching it all unfold, and felt something he'd spent 20 years searching for. Home. Not a place. Not a building. But this. Love and purpose and the knowledge that broken things could be mended. That people could change. That kindness planted in darkness could grow into something beautiful given enough time. That promises kept were more valuable than empires built. Eden turned in his arms, looked up at him. "What are you thinking?" Minjun smiled, genuine and full. "That I spent 20 years trying to be worthy of a 9-year-old girl's kindness. And I finally figured out how. How? By becoming someone who teaches our daughter to see people, to feed them, to care when the world says not to. By building something that lasts longer than power." He touched her face gently. "By loving you. By choosing this. Every day. Forever." Eden's eyes filled with tears. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said. I have 20 years of words saved up. You're going to hear a lot more." She laughed, kissed him, and Minjun tasted joy on her lips. Behind them, Maya called out, another child at the fence, this time with their parent, asking about enrollment. The center was growing. The neighborhood was healing. The community was becoming whole again. And somewhere in that same city, a young boy clutched a silver bangle and allowed himself to hope that maybe someone really did see him. That maybe he wasn't alone after all. That maybe, just maybe, he'd survive this. The promise was being kept. again and again and again. And in a penthouse overlooking the city, on a kitchen table, sat a yellowed piece of paper in a frame. Words written in shaky English by a 12-year-old boy 2 decades ago. You saved my life. Someday I save yours. Promise is promise. I come back. MJ. Below it, in fresh ink, Eden had added a line in her handwriting. You did. And you became someone worth coming back to. That's what matters. The story came full circle. The broken boy and the kind girl. The empire built and dismantled. The promise kept and the future built. 20 years. One Bangle. 2 people learning that love, real love, was choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. The end. Thank you for staying with Eden and Minjun's journey from beginning to end, besties. Their story reminds us that kindness plants seeds we can't always see growing, but they grow anyway. That broken people can find each other and become whole. That it's never too late to choose to be better. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button. We have more stories about love that defies logic, about people who choose each other against impossible odds, about the moments that change everything. Drop a comment with your thoughts, your city, what resonated with you. We read every single one. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.